live on YouTube.
We are live on YouTube.
Right. Mara, could you change my name there because I can't seem to be able to do it here.
Well, your name has no. Probably because I've disallowed you.
I'm up there as Judge Writing. I don't like coming in as Judge Writing. When I click on the three dots, I'm only getting the option of changing editing.
You can change it now.
Oh, hold on, I have it. Sorry, I have it.
I have. I had disabled it. I didn't realise I could.
Oh, had you? Okay.
Yeah.
Delusions of grandeur.
Delusions. Yeah. I'm always deluded.
Pat, apologies for coming in a bit late. I was having trouble there again, folks, getting in.
No bother. We were having a nice chat.
Yeah, that's good.
And we decided we would never ever speak of any such difficulties ever again on the YouTube channel. And
that makes sense, right?
We'd hide everything away from the audience, the same as they do in top classes.
Why did that happen? Dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Hey, Pat, as a matter of interest, just while won't be a question you'll be asked by anybody else, when's the last time you were on a podcast?
The last time, well, I think that's an interesting question. The last time I did a podcast was an hour-long show about Christmas 12 months ago with an American podcast called the ACAD and COCA Report, which is a medical podcast. So I did an hour for that, and I'm recording another one tomorrow morning. So there you go. I'm doing 2 this week.
But this is good practice for you, so Pat.
Oh yeah.
Well done.
You know, I've done a few radio interviews and stuff like that, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this used to be a radio show. You know that it started out as a radio show.
I heard you say that last night.
Into a podcast show now, because I think podcasts are becoming a lot more popular.
Yeah.
Particularly with younger folk, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, younger folk like me, Ted. Thank you very much.
That's right.
That's a very fine thing. I'm ready to start, guys. I'm
ready to go.
I'm almost ready, folks. Hide self view. All right, 3 speakers. Okay. Oops, I'm not. For some reason,
the people on YouTube, Pat, they get to see all this lovely, what we sometimes call the mess behind the.
Yeah.
You know, this is the real raw section. You know, where we fight with each other, where we say, "Will you hurry up there, Ted, and get your audio ready?"
Paul, if we were using some of the terminology that we learned last night, you would be saying, "Will you hurry up there, Ted, and get your arse in here?"
No, your arse says, Ted.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Now, the people on YouTube need to know that Shilling Speakers in the UK organised a significant event. Shilling Significant Situation. That's what we were last night.
Yeah.
And not only were the 2 district directors on the 2 islands on the west coast of Europe there, 91 and 71, but the international president came in by parachute.
he did. Yeah.
That's right. And you also had.
I think he was in his racing car. I think he was in his racing car because he hung around for about as long as it would take to change tires.
I know they do that at 1.38 seconds in the in Formula One, Paul.
That's right. Pat, I must send something on to you that my nephew created. It's a picture of John Lennon to the music of Imagine.
Okay.
And he did this over. I sent him a question during the week about it. I said, "You must have been suffering from repetitive strain injury because he did it with Rubik cubes, 1,000 Rubik cubes."
Right.
And I said to him, "God, your fingers must have been sore after that." And I just got a response back this morning. He said, "No," he said, "the fingers weren't too bad, Ted." He said, "It was actually my feet." And he said, "My feet were extremely sore after it." He actually did it over 19 hours non-stop.
Wow.
19 hours non-stop. And I asked him again, how did he manage to put the clock, get the clock up there? He said he pinned, no, this is something I didn't clarify with him yet. He said he pinned the clock to his window. No, I'm not sure whether he was talking virtually or physically.
All right. I'd love to
Because,
see that.
and what he did then, Maura and Pat and Paul, you'll appreciate this. What he did everything then. He cut everything down into little frames, and over another couple of hours, he tested to see what was the ideal speed to put the frames in at, and he came up with 48 seconds per frame.
Okay.
Right.
48 seconds per frame. So consequently, whilst the hour hand was going in the direction it should be going, because of the 48 seconds, when you're looking at the clock, if you look at the clock, you think that the second hand is going the opposite way.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
And that was because of the way he did it. But it's an incredible piece of work of art, in my opinion.
Do send it on to. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. Have you ever seen the young Chinese lad juggling 3 Rubik's cubes as he juggling them as he solved them?
Go out, don't you?
Seriously, he had 3 Rubik's cubes, and as he solved them, he was juggling them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. He was actually
juggling them. Yeah. You know,
but my nephew, actually had 1,000 Rubik's cubes, Pat.
1,000? Where do you get 1,000 Rubik's cubes?
No, this is the thing actually. It's not the standard size Rubik's cube. It's even smaller again.
Right.
1 inch.
And because it's smaller again, it makes it more difficult to get the picture you need to get.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it was a fantastic.
Also, Ted, he because he was painting a picture with them,
Yes.
he had to have changed the colours.
Oh yeah, that's what he did. He started the cubic cube started out with the same colour on each square.
Yeah,
Right.
You know what I mean? Blue, red, yellow, green, whatever the other ones are. But that's what he did, Maura. He had a formula worked out to be able to get the picture that he needed. And then he put them all together in 1,000 different Rubik's cubes to get the picture.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds phenomenal. I'd love to see that.
It was incredible.
I'd love to see that. Very.
To do it standing for 19 hours, I thought it was fantastic. The explanation was nearly more adventurous than the picture itself.
Which on Imagine, was it?
And the song then in the background was Imagine.
Did you say this is your nephew?
Yeah, he's my sister's youngest son.
My God, I've seen this piece of video about 3 times.
I sent it on to you, yeah.
Absolutely no idea it had any connection with you.
Oh yeah, my nephew.
Is it on YouTube, Ted?
I taught him to play chess when he was 8 years of age, and he can nearly beat me now. He lives in New York, Pat. And he's an actress. He graduated out of UCC.
Okay. I have 2 brothers who are actually.
Yeah. In his first year in UCC, Pat, he was on the InterVarsity mathematical team.
Okay.
In his first year. An incredible brain.
No, that's phenomenal.
Oh, phenomenal, yeah.
That's phenomenal. Yeah. But it's interesting. I've never been able to solve a Rubik's Cube, but my youngest brother, who's very mathematical, has been able to do it forever.
Oh yeah, I remember the first time I bought a Rubik's Cube, I worked it out, right? It's a fantastic thing to be able to do.
Oh, well, if you can, yeah.
I worked it out, right? And then, in fact, I wrote a formula for it. If I didn't write the formula, I might never have been able to do it again.
Oh, God.
I'm actually ready about 10 seconds after I was asked.
Off you go, so, Mara. Paul, if you don't mind, just before you start, Mara, Paul, if you don't mind, when I'm giving this introduction, would you mind sending on that link that I sent on to you to pass?
What's his name? I'll look him up on YouTube.
His name is Paul Lenihan.
Paul Lenihan. All right.
Yeah, it might be on YouTube, actually, yeah.
Rubik's Cube.
On the WhatsApp, but you embedded it in WhatsApp. It's not a link.
Oh, isn't it? Yeah. I'm ready to go somewhere whenever you're ready.
Okay.
No, I don't have it. Paul, you might send it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send it. But
And if Paul doesn't do it, I'll certainly do it, but I won't be doing it until after the show because this takes on my concentration, whereas Paul is multitasker.
Are we ready? 3, 2,
Yes.
1, go.
Hello, Toastmasters, would-be Toastmasters, listeners and friends. You're very welcome to the talk show for talkers on irishtalkers.com. Our email address is info@irishtalkers.com. You can find us on Facebook as the talk show for talkers, and we look forward to your comments, your questions, your feedback. In fact, we regard these as evaluations, so you are helping us to help you. You can also listen to previous shows on our website, irishtalkers.com. We also publish the Public Speaking Weekly. This is a roundup of links from the internet. It's about Toastmasters, it's about public speaking, it's about confidence. So look out for the newspaper link on our website. But I must just add something here now, that you may have difficulty at this present time because of a fire in the newspaper office. So you may not get it straight away, but Mara has been out there with the fire hoses trying to put that fire out. My name is Ted Melanphy, and I am joined as usual by the prolific, persuasive, passionate, personable Mr. Paul O'Malley.
Listeners, it's a treat to have the attention of your ears again. Thank you very much for them.
Thank you, Paul, and it's always a treat, Paul, to have you on this show with us every week. And tomorrow we have the pleasure and the privilege of a very special guest. We are not going to tell you the gender, the name, the country, the continent, the planet even that this man comes from. Oh, I just have to leave the gender out. Sorry about that, folks. I'm after taking away some of the surprise already. All you need to know is that this is an exceptional person. Tomorrow you will be listening to this gentleman's dulcet tones. And as usual on this week's show, we have the thought for the week, we have a word for the week, we won't be delving into the magazine this week, but Paul will be talking to us about, in the third section, Paul will be talking to us about reviewing our membership. Oh no, Paul is telling me stop, is he?
The silence is to give Moira an opportunity to edit what has just happened, because what I wanted to say is that I didn't have time to tell you, I'm changing the topic that I'm going to use to a topic which is in the latest edition of the magazine.
What is it, Paul?
Right?
What is it? Because I've already put that topic everywhere.
Oh, right. Well, that's going to cause a problem, is it? Well,
just tell me, and I will change it whilst you're talking.
It will be Poets Help Toastmasters.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, right now, Ted, you all that paper shuffling came over on. What have you done? You're half covered.
Oh, you know what? Am I sorry about that?
Yes, you keep on covering the camera.
Am I fully covered now?
No, that's fine. And every time you do that, you're getting this.
Oh, I see. Yes, sorry about that.
You have to be very careful with moving papers anywhere near your camera.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. What is the Zoom code? Let me join in on the show. Branchings Exiled, we'd love to have you on the show, but not today. Send us an email and we'll talk.
But by all means, he can listen to us.
Of course. Right, where were we? Now, Ted, I'm going to take you back to...
The planet even that this man comes from. Oh, I just have to leave the gender out. Sorry about that, folks. I'm after taking away some of the surprise already. All you need to know is that this is an exceptional person. Tomorrow you will be listening to this gentleman's dulcet tones. And as usual on this week's show, we have...
Okay, so it's from there, and as usual, well, without the and, of course, Ted.
So we have...
So
me and Mark, count me down, so...
You're going to say, on this week's show, we have, okay? And can you remember that Paul's changed to Poets Helped Toastmasters? Yep. You got that? Yeah. 3, 2, 1, go.
On this week's show, we'll have the word for the week, we'll have a thought for the week. In segment 3, Paul will be talking to us about how poets help Toastmasters. So you're going to be looking forward to that. And my thought for the week this week comes to us from a gentleman who owns a website. This gentleman is Indian, and his website is all about books. And this is his quotation. There's that fine line between confidence and overconfidence. You set the world afire by one, and yourself afire by the other. And that gentleman's name is Prakshi Gupta. So there's that fine line between confidence and overconfidence. You set the world afire by one, and yourself afire by the other. What do you think of that, Paul?
If I'm coming onto a stage, the last thing I want to do is set myself on fire and have to run off stage and look for a glass of water. That's definitely doesn't appeal to me at all. If I come on stage, do I really want to set the audience on fire? No, I do not. Nobody wants to be caught in a firestorm. I want to seduce the audience into my world, but that's a different issue altogether. So I'm against this. I come from a long family of firefighters who are here to preserve humanity and speakers from being caught up in flames. Now, on the other hand, if we talk in metaphors, a speaker who's on fire is really, leading everybody into a great situation, and everybody's pumped up and everybody's wonderful and everyone's feeling great and dopamines are flying out of their ears and all sorts of other things like that. So great for a speaker to be on fire. Setting the audience on fire means that they're all going rah, 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 like a certain type of politician has done incredibly effectively over the last 4 years in some countries that will remain nameless here on the Talk Show for Talkers. So I really have to say, Ted, that this is a tremendous quotation for allowing me an opportunity to pull the leg out of it.
Well done, Paul, and thank you also, Paul, for the clarification, because I was getting worried when you started out saying you were going to put yourself in fire, because that's not the point of what this gentleman was telling us, Prakshi. Of course, he was speaking metaphorically, and he was using. I think it's a lovely quotation from that point of view. So, Paul, have you got a word of the week for us?
Ted, you brought that to an abrupt close. Now, come on. You brought that quotation onto the table. I can't possibly let you get away with just simply starkly leaving the listeners. They were hanging on your words. Come on now. Give us a bit of...
good way to stop it there if they're still hanging, and they'll hang with us rather than against us.
Oh, well, okay. If you want to do it that way, you've certainly left me in the lurch anyway.
Sorry, Paul. Yeah, maybe I have left you in the lurch. So
that's a good point.
Go back and elaborate another little bit on Prakshi's quotation.
I tell you what, let's leave him in the lurch. I'm quite happy where he is, right? Okay. I have a word of the week, and it's lurch. Lurch. We'll come on to what it means in a minute, but I want to just quick fire ask you, Ted, put the word lurch in a sentence quickly, any old sentence you like.
I had a dog one time, the type of dog it was a lurcher.
No. That's too clever. That's too clever. Right,
that's
come on.
Too clever. When you asked me, this came off the top of my head, Paul. It was like a clever topic.
Okay, would you please just put the word lurch in a sentence?
Okay. I lurched from seat to seat. I lurched from branch to branch.
Thank you. Brilliant, Ted. Let me ask, perhaps I'd like to ask somebody else. There's a reason why I want the word lurch, not the word lurched or lurcher or lurching, but the word lurch in a sentence.
I lurch from pew to pew.
Very good. And tell me,
The church.
that's terrific, Ted. And tell me, if I left you, where would I leave you? And I want
lurch. In the lurch.
in the lurch. Okay, right. Well, here it is that I'm a poet, and I also love doing the grammarian role in Toastmasters. And when I decided to pick this word lurch, which I haven't heard anybody use in a Toastmasters club yet, I made a huge mistake. And I was only saved from embarrassing myself in public when I found that instead of being left on the lurch, you are left in the lurch. And a good grammarian will, of course, pick up the distinction between being left on the lurch, which is incorrect, and being left in the lurch. And that was the extraordinary thing I discovered. Now, the word lurch has been around for quite a long time. Anybody want to guess when it first entered the English language? The word lurch?
17th century?
It's a bit of a risky one. No, you're wrong again, Ted. It's lurch. This is the usual thing on the show. Nobody can guess. It was a 16th century word.
I wasn't that far up.
You weren't. And you know, to be in the lurch is to be in a vulnerable and unsupported position. You really are left in a difficult position if you're left in the lurch. You can see a situation where somebody goes to be married and they're left on the altar in the lurch. Vulnerable and unsupported and abandoned. So it has to do with staggering as well, to lurch from left to right, to stagger this way or that, to roll or to pitch around the place. You can also talk about a ship lurching, the sudden roll of a ship from one side to the other, which I'm sure all sailors are very, very familiar with. It's a handy word to have if you're also playing a card player. I don't know how many, maybe some of you listeners are into playing cribbage. And as you know, you can be defeated by a lurch, as in cribbage. It's also a word that is handy because it's only got one syllable, and that gives it a special extra punch. One syllable words are very useful to speakers when they want to emphasize something. And they're particularly good to put at the end of a sentence. So as you can see, listeners, I am about to be left in the lurch. That's what happens at the end of the first episode of this podcast this week. Wouldn't you say that's about time to be left in the lurch, Ted?
What I would like to say to that, Paul, is that we have about another minute left. And when you use the word lurch as a one-syllable word, you gave us the extra punch. And punch is also a one-syllable word.
Well, I'm very glad, listeners, that you have been brought into the picture by being given two examples of a one-syllable word. What I would like to say, though, in relation to lurch is that Ted was absolutely right when he talked about a lurcher. It's a form of dog.
Yes.
And to talk about lurching from side to side, he has often lurched, usually when he came out of the pub, as he swayed from side to side, not with Guinness, because he's not a Guinness drinker. Would be breaking a confidence to say what Ted Melanphy drinks instead of Guinness.
And that brings us to a lovely conclusion to the segment one, Paul. And come back to us tomorrow, listeners, because you're going to be listening to the voice and to the wise words of our guests. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Hey, Ted, you turned off your sound.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't want any sounds to be picked up while you were talking.
Oh, I get
I forgot that I was muted.
Well, Moira will have no difficulty editing it because she'll simply look at the sound wave and she'll simply cut out the silence or reduce the silence to at least half of its existing size. So silences are no problem. Sure, they're not, Moira.
Yeah, it's good for Moira, yeah.
Silence
And actually, Paul, when you were speaking about the shilling speakers last night, I came away from that. All I was drinking last night, no gentlemen, was, and Moira, was water. But I came away from that meeting intoxicated. I thought the content, the people who spoke on it, I thought it was a fantastic meeting. And it just goes to show you how we can unite the world through Toastmasters. And there was a classical example, again there last night, you had Ireland and England. You know, they're our closest neighbour, and they should be regarded as our closest neighbour. And even though we were speaking some of the stuff last night, we were speaking about 1916, that's history, and we should learn from history. And we should go from that stage on to the next stage, which is they're our closest neighbour, and we should be cooperating with them, and they should be cooperating with us.
Here, here.
Thanks, Pat. In fact, I was so mad actually because when you read your poem, Paul, and when we heard the poetry from Sean Lyons, I had the piece ready for Ted Cochran, and he said, "Yeah, I'll sign you up for that." I was going to give the story of Joseph Mary Plunkett and his part in 1916, and then I was going to read the poem. I saw his blood upon the rose, and the fact that he married Grace Gifford. You know, which is, the history is fantastic. It's a beautiful romantic story. But did any of you know that Michael Collins was the aide-de-camp to Joseph Mary Plunkett?
No, it's a part of history that I haven't really studied because, you know, it has in some hands the potential to polarize.
Yes, good point.
Yeah.
Good point, actually. And that is something I was conscious of if I was going to give that piece last night, but I was going to give the story as well, and I was looking at it from the romantic angle, you know?
Yeah.
But I take your point, Pat, that can happen, all right, when you...
Yeah, it could be misinterpreted in the context, in that context particularly, you know?
Or stroking up old wounds or whatever.
Yeah, could be. You know, it's one of the things that I say in one of my talks that I put up on YouTube, is that insult needs to be taken. It can be given, but it doesn't need to be taken. You know, and people can take insult where none is given.
True.
You know, so or offense can be taken, and a lot of people like to take offense. You know, just go on Twitter any day and you'll see that everywhere.
No, you're so right. You have to be sensitive about the words you use. All right.
Yeah.
And he said that the words you use are powerful. You can mend a broken heart, or your mouth can spit venom.
Yeah. Or Maya Angelou, it's not what people say to us, it's not what people do to us, it's how they make us feel is what we will always remember.
Yeah, that's true. And I have a nice little one too, but I can't remember who I must attribute it to, but it's, if words left physical scars, would any of us be recognisable?
Yes, but I counter that by saying to you that it's not what happens to us that's important, it's the meaning that we attach to it.
Yes, good point,
Yeah.
Well done. This is becoming the philosophical corner, actually, between the two segments. Well done, Pat.
Yes, I keep these 3 books that I've been. They're just. I keep ideas and aphorisms.
Oh, lovely,
and I find them fantastic because you dip into them if you're looking for an idea. You know.
I have one of those books here too, Pat.
Yeah.
Pat, have you ever heard, I'm sure you have, but I'll ask you the question. Have you ever heard of Padraig O'Malley?
No.
Padraig O'Malley is a raconteur. He's a businessman.
Right.
He runs a mastermind group called Schmacht.
What's it called?
Schmacht, S-M-A, Fada, C-H-T.
Right, okay.
It's the Irish for discipline.
Okay.
So that's what his mastermind group is all about. if you sign up with him to do a course with him, what he does is he puts you into a group of people, and you will have one person who will hold you accountable for the things you say you're going to do, particularly from a business point of view.
Right.
But he's a fantastic. He's a good friend of mine. In fact, he was. I don't know. We never interviewed him on this, but I did invite him into B2B one day to come in as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
But he sends on stuff to me every Sunday morning, and he'll send on a little story. He'll send on a quotation,
Right.
and he'll send on what did you take from the story that I gave today. He's a wonderful storyteller.
Right.
I've used some of his stories in some of my speeches, little bits of it for ideas. But I regard him as a good friend, and how I actually met him was January over 12 months ago, January 2019. I was inside the library and I was picking up a book I wanted, but there was another book I could take out another book. So it was when I was coming out the door in a rush. I saw this book that caught my eye. I saw the cover of it, and the title of the book was Rocking Horse Shit. Excuse me.
Okay.
Rocking Horse Shit. But Padraig O'Malley wrote that book.
Yeah.
If you want to get more information for your aphorisms, you'll have a look at that book.
Here,
It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book.
I'll find it. I'm sure it's on Amazon.
No, it isn't on Amazon.
Is it not?
That's how I met Padraig. I had so much trouble trying to get the book. I wanted to buy the book and I could not buy it anywhere. And I eventually, after checking a couple of bookshops, I went into Eason's. Actually helped me out. That was a Waterstones. One of them explained to me anyhow when I gave him the title of the book. They said the reason you can't buy it on Amazon or anywhere else for that matter is that it was a self-published book.
Right.
And the amount that he had printed, he had sold, and he didn't get a reprint. Probably people weren't looking for it. But I thought it was a fantastic book. But I'd imagine if you get on to Padraig himself, Padraig O'Malley, once you look up Schmacht, you can touch
Okay,
base.
so I'll do that.
Yeah, lovely man, beautiful.
I'll do that. Yeah, because one of the things I subscribe to is a website called Farnham Street, FARNAM, no H in it. And Farnham Street is the street on which the Berkshire Hathaway offices are based in wherever they are in the States.
Right.
But it's and the idea is that it's basically sharing the wisdoms that are already well worked out, so that you don't have to figure them out yourself. And it's signal in a very, very noisy environment. So really powerful ideas and concepts, and run by a guy called Shane Parrish. And if you want to just get to the essence of something, and most of it is free. He does a weekly email on a Monday, and he does podcast interviews with a lot of people, and then if you're a member, you get the transcripts of them. So I would listen to these, and he's got a blog site that's behind the paywall. But it's actually very good. So I do a little blogging on that, not much, but a little.
Excellent.
Guys, to interrupt, can't we cover this in the second half of the interview, Ted?
Good point, actually. Yes.
Rather than just do it here. I'm keen for us to move ahead.
Yeah, and actually, Paul, you're after just alerting me, in so far as I have to see a dentist at 5 o'clock.
Well, I thought I'm judging it. Microsoft did. So
yeah, look, we're all on time.
Oh yes, sorry, Pat. What time are you?
I should. If I can go be done about 4:45, that would be.
Oh yeah, we'll crack on. So thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
Already.
Nothing extraneous now.
Okay.
With professional organisation.
Yeah. No worries.
Right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome, Toastmasters. This is segment 2 of the Talk Show for Talkers. On this week, and this is the week of, next week will be St. Patrick's Day, so we're in the week just ahead of Patrick's Day. You're very welcome back, and I did flag yesterday that we have a very special guest on with us today. I'm not going to keep you in suspense any longer. This gentleman's name is Pat Cashlin. And Pat, you're very welcome to the Talk Show for Talkers.
Thank you, Ted. Wonderful to be here.
and wonderful to have you here, sir. Tis our pleasure and our privilege. And Pat, what we do with our guests, and we have had many guests on this show going right back to 2014 when we started out, and we had everybody from a person who just joined Toastmasters to international presidents to the CEO of Toastmasters to world champions of public speaking and everybody in between. What this particular segment is about, Pat, is it's really about your journey in Toastmasters. And there are 5 questions. No, you won't know exactly what the 5 questions are because I'll be asking you other questions as well. And this is the beauty of it. So, Pat, the first question I would like to ask you, and this would not be regarded as one of the 5 questions. What club are you a member of?
I'm a member of 2 clubs, Ted. I joined Dunleary Club in Dublin in October 2018. And last month I joined Digital Communicators, which is an advanced online club based in District 71 as well. So a member of 2 clubs.
Well done. I thought you had been in Toastmasters for youngsters. You're only a baby Toastmaster, so.
Oh, yeah.
You're only a baby. And the first time I met you, actually, Pat, is you didn't meet me at the same time, but I certainly met you. I was very impressed when I heard you doing contest chair in our conference last year.
That was, I suppose that would probably, I'd rank that as the highlight of my Toastmasters journey, because I was area director in area 5, Division M, District 71 last year, which was great fun. I really enjoyed that. And I had chaired the area contest, and then I was asked would I do the division contest. And to be honest with you, I found it quite stressful because I wasn't really that used to it. And then Adrian Harney, who was the division director, called me up and said, look, be ready to, if you're going to be invited to do the district contest. And I said, look, Adrian, I'm too busy, I can't. It's just too stressful. I'm not up to that. And then I got a call from Jared Mannix, and I thought, well, I can't turn down the quality program director on this, and I said yes, but it was a fantastic learning and great fun. But I do remember at the beginning of the first semi-final, I didn't call out the list of speakers in order, and Eddie O'Mahony, who was in the background, stopped me and said, Pat, you forgot to do that. And I just went on, but I called him out and off we went. But it was great fun, and it was wonderful to meet people, and great to practice listening and ask questions and do something different, because I had no idea. I didn't come to it with a preconceived idea of what I should be doing, other than to get the best out of the speakers and to make sure that they could be the best that they could be when they went on stage, comfortable, relaxed, and knowing, was their sound right, was their video right, was their speaking area right, and what would happen if things went wrong. And so it was really, really enjoyable. Really enjoyable.
Yeah, the beauty of Toastmasters, Pat, and I'll give you a phrase that Enjoyer Heterorachi used. I see something in you, but I don't know what it is. And the wisdom in those words is that people see things in us that we ourselves would not feel capable of doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And sometimes we need to push to do things. We need to get out of our comfort zone. I say to my kids, go to your boundaries. You'll never get there because your boundaries will keep expanding away from you.
Yeah, beautiful. That's beautiful. I had a similar experience too, actually, when Michael Collins was the district director, and he asked me would I take on the role of contest chair in the district conference when it was in Limerick. And of course I said, of course I will, because I had interviewed him on this show, and a couple of weeks after I must have done something right in the show, because a couple of weeks after he was on to me, will you take on this show? And I said, of course I will. But it was when I put the phone down after, I said to myself, what have you just accepted? But like you, Pat, it was a wonderful experience, great learning experience. Great learning experience. I really enjoyed it.
And great to work with the best speakers as well, and to watch them And the best part of it was actually speaking to them afterwards, interviewing them and saying, talk to me about something, finding something in their speech that was core to it. And the listening part of that was probably the hardest part of the whole thing, to concentrate on each speech and give it your individual attention so that you could get to the core of the speakers. And after the contest, I called all the speakers, both the winners and the ones that didn't get through to the final, after both semi-finals and the final, just to say, look, congratulations or hard luck, and to give them a little feedback on the speech. And one of them said to me, which was probably the nicest thing of all, and she said that one of the ones that didn't get through, she said, I felt that I had been heard. This call tells me that I had been heard, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But you have a fantastic voice, Pat. I think I might have said it before. You have a kind of a very honeyed, cultured voice, and you help people to relax.
It's very kind of you. Thank you, Ted.
No, certainly. And I have no doubt that we'll be getting evaluations back on that. Now, Pat, what brought you to Toastmasters?
It was an interesting journey. A lot of people would probably do this journey in reverse, but I'd done a talk about 2.5 years ago for a friend of mine who's a doctor, to a lunchtime talk, a medical talk on to this group of doctors, and one of them wrote to me afterwards and said, he said, I really enjoyed that. You should do a TEDx talk. And I thought, here's an idea. I wonder how you do one of those. So I scurried around the internet, and lo and behold, TEDx Dún Laoghaire was on its first event, and it was starting in October, and they were having a call for speakers. So I got in touch with the organizer, who happened to be a member of Dún Laoghaire Toastmasters, Jenny Lazar, and I said, how do I get on the call for speakers? And she sent me the questionnaire, because she was being done by questionnaire. I filled it in. I did my 1-minute video, which took me about 60 takes to do, because I'd never done one of these things before. And I sent it in, and I got called. And I thought, okay, and then, so I did the TEDx talk in October, it was recorded in October. And then I said to myself, oh God, I think I probably need to become a better speaker. So I also joined I joined the Dún Laoghaire Toastmasters in October. And that was the start of my speaking journey. But I had been speaking for about 3 or 4 years before that. I'd done a bit of speaking and enjoyed it. So, and this has been, it's been great. So that's what took me there in the first place.
Fantastic story. And what has been the greatest benefit to you?
I think my growth as a speaker, the friends I've made, the places I've been to, the camaraderie and the honesty that you hear in Toastmasters, and that honesty can actually be visceral. It can touch the heart, your heart. It can get you into really great conversations, and great speeches change us. They impact on us. And as I've grown.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see a good crew on the phone. Thank you for joining. I want to do 3 things in this webinar. I want to take you through.
Sorry, I think that's me.
The structured pathways and how it works. Then to share.
Sorry, guys, I'm very sorry. I was.
That allows you to help you choose the path.
Yeah, that's
There's
my fault.
a touch
Excuse
of
me.
Robert Frost going through this.
I'll get rid of this. I'll get rid of
I
this.
do like the
Don't
poem.
get rid of it at all, just turn it off.
But that was me. I knew that was my voice.
I knew it was your voice the very minute the first word came out of the gentleman's mouth. I knew it was you. I was saying you're doing a bit of ventriloquy now as well with me.
I thought it was me, because I keep on
And
doing
Pat,
things like
this
that.
just before we start re-recording, these things happen inside in the studio all the time. And I was wondering, Paul, you've been looking at the screen with only one eye there. Have you something in your eye or what? We can't hear you now at all, and then lip reading you.
Moira's muted him.
What just happened is a result of the fact that the webinar started automatically,
All right.
and I didn't realise that was going to happen.
Yeah, that's okay.
I was looking into Pat Caslin's previous history.
Yeah.
And I,
My growth as a speaker, the friends I've made, the places I've been to, the camaraderie and the honesty that you hear in Toastmasters, and that honesty can actually be visceral. It can touch the heart, your heart. It can get you into really great conversations. And great speeches change us. They impact us. And as I've grown. Do you want to start that question again, maybe, Ted? Yeah.
Yeah. No, Moira is finding where
we were.
If you start the question, it might be easier just to ask the question again. Moira, as I've grown, because I can't remember what I said.
Yeah, and that's what happens actually, Pat. We were talking about what has been the greatest benefit to you.
Yeah.
So when Mark was right now, she called us in. You're muted now, Marla.
It can touch the heart, your heart. It can get you into really great conversations, and great speeches change us. They impact on us. And what's more, I'm not sure what Moira is doing.
I think she'll come back to the recording, and that's what you were saying to me there. Great speeches can touch us, they can touch your heart, so she'll probably want you to pick up from around there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what my flow was.
Yeah, when Mara is chatting to herself there, she doesn't realize she's muted. So Mara, will you just play back a bit for Pat, and so that he knows where he is, and then you can count him in.
This is where the noise came in. So
yeah,
as I've grown.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see.
No, completely overrode what you were saying.
Okay. So, well, if you like, so just take that off, and we'll start again.
Yeah, can you ask the question again? And I'll just start from the beginning. I think that'll be easier.
Hold on then, guys. Hold on. In order for that to work, Moira has to rewind.
Okay.
Yes,
Right, so this will take a couple of minutes. So just
all right, yeah.
Just let's have silence while Moira does that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
And when she's ready, she'll tell us.
The better for that.
We have to be quiet.
I've done a bit of speaking and enjoyed it. So and this has been it's been great. So that's what took me there in the first place.
Fantastic story. And what has been the greatest benefit to you?
Okay, do you want to go straight from there, Pat? What's been the greatest benefit to you?
Sure, count me in.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
I've really enjoyed the lockdown from a Toastmasters point of view, because it's taken me to 30 different clubs around the world. I've seen fantastic speeches, and I've been able to go to a lot of clubs and speak in them that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I've done loads of evaluation speeches test speeches for evaluation contests, and I've got great feedback from fantastic speakers, the best speakers in the clubs or the areas. And that has taught me an enormous amount about how I improve my own speaking. So that's been my greatest benefit in getting around.
Interesting. And what has been your biggest Toastmasters challenge?
Oh, I think that's probably straightforward. I've begun to understand in the last year the power of story, and to construct stories that are coherent, that are logical, that make points, and that are powerful is really, really hard to do. And I've been trying to get my stories to a higher level. I've been trying to get more emotion into them. I've been trying to figure out how do you structure a story that they become powerful, that are impactful, that engage an audience from the beginning to the end. And recently, from traveling to different clubs, I've managed to get a structure to put around storytelling that I think is superb. It really is. I've known, so one of the clubs that I've talked to is Accentuators in Dublin, and two of the people in there, Karen Henry and Cathal McStiffon, have created a storytelling workshop that they've rolled out to thousands of people in Accenture globally, coming out of their own work on storytelling and Toastmasters. And I did a speech for them, a keynote at lunchtime a few months ago, and I asked them would they give that workshop to Microsoft, which they very kindly did. Microsoft is a new club that I'm mentoring, and they very kindly did. And as a result, I got to understand how you source and tell stories in a way that's powerful and persuasive, and hack into the concept that we can persuade people to do things by telling them better stories that have purpose. So that's probably been my greatest challenge has been to date, to get on top of how do I tell better stories.
Well, listening to you, Pat, you're certainly after getting on top of it. And we have a lady in our club who started a club such as that. It's all storytelling and poetry as well, but specifically storytelling. Her name is Mary Walsh, and she has called that group the Gab. So, which is appropriate since she's living in Blarney.
Right.
Like that, that's a fantastic group of people as well. Traditional storytellers, storytellers who go around from club to club. So it isn't an international organisation such as Toastmasters, but certainly Toastmasters can learn a lot from it. And if you could, Pat, with regards to Toastmasters, what would you change?
Continuing on the theme, then, I would have a path that's dedicated to storytelling, because storytelling is the essence of our ability to persuade. And the best speakers that I listen to tell great stories. So I would definitely have a path that has storytelling, a really powerful storytelling structure, embedded into the center of it.
And is there not one there? I can't remember. No, there's not.
Not specifically storytelling.
Okay.
No.
That's interesting, yeah. And what keeps you coming back to Toastmasters?
The buzz, the great people I meet, the ability to get around everywhere, the growth that I've had as a speaker, the ability to practice, to hear myself speak out loud the things that I've been reading about for years, and to share a lot of the thoughts that I have, the ideas that I have, and some of the wisdoms that I've got from having had time to look at that or to study that. And I really enjoy sharing that, and I enjoy the feedback that comes from it, and particularly the feedback that helps me to get better.
That's fantastic. Pat, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, sir, about your journey in Toastmasters. Illuminating, fantastic answers that all of us can learn from. Thank you very much for being our guest this week on the Talk Show for Talkers.
Thank you, Ted.
And thank you, sir. Well done. And please come back tomorrow, because tomorrow we will be listening to Mr. Paul O'Mahony.
Sorry, Ted. I cut you off I thought you'd finished.
Okay, no worries.
So,
you usually reprimand me when I don't give the listeners.
I do, and this time I was at fault. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go again.
And please come back to us tomorrow when you'll be listening to the dulcet tones of Paul O'Mahony. And Paul is going to be talking to us about how to make our speech contests more attractive. No,
he changed it, Ted.
Oh, beg your pardon, Paul, sorry. Completely forgotten. Paul, I'll give me the title of it again. It's about...
Just poets and poetry. Was it, Paul?
No, Poets Help Toastmasters.
Poets
okay,
Help Toastmasters.
Thanks.
Just
sorry,
that, Ted. Poets Help Toastmasters, okay? 3, 2, 1, go.
Please come back to us tomorrow and listen to Paul O'Mahony speaking about poets helping Toastmasters.
Right, let's do that again, Ted. All I want from you is Poets Helping Toastmasters. The introduction you've already done.
Hold on. Poets Help Toastmasters.
Yeah, so that's all you have to say, Ted. Poets Help Toastmasters. Nothing else. Okay? 3, 2, 1, go.
Poets Help Toastmasters.
Good.
I never had my knuckles rapped so many times, Pat, as I did today. I think they're only doing that to try and impress you.
Oh, it's I get mine wrapped all the time, Ted,
Yeah.
all the time.
We get these little wake-up calls, so, you know. Once you're humble enough to accept the raps, we don't mind. I often say, one of my little phrases is, don't judge me by my successes, judge me by the amount of times I get up again. So Paul, I'll introduce you now as soon as Mara's ready. And Paul,
Yeah?
I'll introduce you now as soon as Mara's ready. And by all means, if you want to call Pat in to help you on your poetry, on your poetry.
Oh, well, do this, because this is an article that was written, it's seeded by Carl Walsh.
All right.
So please do. I'm gonna, before you go, I'm gonna stick something in the chat, which is a better talk than my TED talk.
Well done, thank you. Can you see Mara's eyes up there, Pat?
Okay.
Going around, that means that she's angry. Right, Mara, go ahead.
3, 2, 1, go.
And it gives me great pleasure now to present Paul O'Mahony, Toastmasters, listeners and friends, and even would-be Toastmasters, of which we have some listening also. Paul is going to talk to us about Poets Help Toastmasters. Over to you, Paul.
I liked to walk in the river meadows, in the thick of the dew and the morning shadows, at the edge of the woods, in a deep defile, at peace with myself, in the first sunshine. There are the first 4 lines of the translation of The Midnight Court by Brian Merriman. A poem. Have you ever had a poet at one of your club meetings? Have you ever had a poet at your district conference? Has a poet ever opened the international convention? Certainly a poet starred during the inauguration of Joe Biden and became one of the greatest talking points afterwards. Why on earth is poetry worth having at a meeting? That's what I'd like to say a few words with you, and what began my quest to find out why poetry mattered was a meeting I went to when I was an area director in Middleton Club in Cork. I went along, I had absolutely no idea what this club meeting was going to be like, and practically the first item on the agenda was a person who came up and read a poem. And it turned out that Middleton Club had a slot at every meeting at which a person would read a poem. It wasn't evaluated, but it was an interesting difference. Some clubs have joke masters. This club had poet. And then, to my great surprise, I opened the most recent edition of Toastmaster magazine. Now, I'm a bit prejudiced, I better declare. I write poetry myself. But there was high praise for a club in Dublin, Ireland, east coast of Ireland, called Dunleary Toastmasters. And apparently that club has a slot at every meeting for a poet master. And there's a reference to one of their members, a chap called Carl Walsh, who hasn't been a member in Toastmasters very long. I've done a little bit of research to find out who he is. I've looked on the club Facebook page, and I know that he won the most improved Toastmaster in that club in the year 2019-2020. So this is a really bright cookie, this man, I would guess. And I so happen to have with me today somebody who can give me a snippet of the inside story about Dunleary Toastmasters. I so happen to have, by accident, a member of that club here. So I'm going to ask Pas Caslin a leading question. Pat Caslin, have you ever been a poet master in Dunleary Club? And if you have, what poem did you read and why did you read it?
I have. And the poem I read was Robert Frost's poem, which I love, which is the two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, and so on. It's a superb poem because, and I like it for the last stanza, I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages, hence two roads diverge in the wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. And I feel like that in my own career, and that poem speaks to me.
Let me just return then, Pat, to the question, why did you read it at the beginning of a Toastmasters Club meeting?
We read a poem, we have somebody read a poem at the beginning of every meeting, and it is a fantastic way for new members to practice vocal variety, to bring something of themselves that allows them to express something that they like in front of other members and to get themselves speaking. And it also enlightens us. And what we do is we put the poem into the chat afterwards so that people can take it away. And we've had some fantastic poems that I've learned a lot from. And it's a wonderful way to get people speaking.
The article by Jennifer Blank, who's a distinguished Toastmaster who frequently writes in the Toastmaster magazine, points out a number of reasons why poetry is relevant to speaking in Toastmasters. The most obvious one I'd have thought of is that it alerts everybody in the room to the fact that words count. Every single word counts, because poets, if they're any good at all, deliberately choose the words that they use and deliberately cut out cliches and extraneous words, and they basically sculpt the first draft of the poem down to be something concise and precise. And if you have somebody read a poem at the beginning of a meeting, it puts a certain air of attention into the meeting. Now, Jennifer says that the role of having a poet master is to have an influence on what happens at the beginning of the meeting, to provide an upbeat and a reflective start to the meeting. You're immediately in the presence of language which is more arresting, more involving than the ordinary chatter you'd have with somebody at a bus stop or in a pub, or chatting with your mates. The language is all very, there are powerful phrases used in there. And indeed, that gives everybody in the room an opportunity to think, wow, my language better be unsung this week. Also, the language can be evocative and rich. But also the language operates at two different levels when a poet's involved. One is the concrete, like, I wandered lonely as a cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud is a guy walking by himself, looking up in the sky and sees a cloud, and a cloud is lonely. Bit of an odd word to use about a cloud, some might say, but it means that it's there by itself. Fair enough. But is that what William Wordsworth actually, is that all Wordsworth was saying when he said, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills? No. He was inviting people into a meditative state where it was possible for the imagination to flourish and for the mood of the individual to change. That was achieved by a poet, because that's what poets do. The piece of poetry I read a minute ago began with, I like to walk in the river meadows. Well, so what? I like to buy ice cream on Thursdays. I like to walk in the river meadows. There's a huge difference between I like to buy ice creams on Thursdays, written by somebody who isn't a poet, and somebody who says, I like to buy ice creams on Thursdays, who is a poet. Because we all know already that poetic language operates at the concrete level and at the metaphorical level. Also, Poetry gives people an example of different rhetorical devices that are used by great speakers. Any poem you really read, you'll find that some device is being used by the poet to hold the attention of the reader. Also, you'll find that if you write poetry yourself, you're going to become a much better speech writer, because when you write a poem, you cut out everything that you don't need. And if you're going to write a speech that's going to have impact, you better cut out everything you don't need. There's a phrase used among poets that we must murder our children. That is to do with the fact that poets often get phrases and sentences that they fall in love with. They love them, they think they're great. When you work on the poem, you decide, well, that's a great phrase, but it doesn't work in this particular poem. So you murder it, you get rid of it. You might even feel sad. And that's the same thing in relation to making a speech. You might very well have this very fancy expression that you think is, oh, that's really good. No one will ever have said that before. And then you come back to the key question, what's the purpose of your speech? Is it to impress people with your language, or is it to move them to action? And when you start asking yourself about the difference between impressing an audience and moving an audience, then you really do enter into the world that poets inhabit all the time.
Paul, can I come in there, please? Just want to add my own tuppence for it. You referenced the inauguration of President Biden and that lady who gave that poem that day, who gave those wonderful words, Amanda Gorman. And she was the poet, the youth poet laureate in America when she was 18 years of age. She's 22 years of age now, but I think one line from that particular poem, of many fantastic lines: we lay down our arms so we may reach out our arms to others.
There's a fine example of a line that a poet will write, engaging in wordplay and getting people to listen closely to what has been said. The other advantage of having somebody read a poem at the start of the meeting is that if the person reads the poem aloud and in the spirit of the poem, there will be a rhythm. There will be a cadence. And once you bring rhythm and cadence into a room, what effect is it going to have on all the other people who are going to speak? It's giving an example of how rhythm and cadence matters, how the rise and fall of sentences make a difference. Some people are learning the rhythm of language and how it works in terms, and this is often called vocal variety. But vocal variety is what every poet has to put into every poem if they're serious, because it's very unlikely that a poet will write a poem without reading it out loud to themselves and feeling what it's like to come out of their mouth. Pat, in your experience in Dunleary, has the reading of a poet, has it had much influence on what happens subsequently during the meeting? Or is it just simply a way of giving a person a bit of self-confidence by just reading something out?
No, I think it picks up on the theme of the poem, or the purpose of the poem is very often picked up in the speeches, in the table topics, and in the comments that come afterwards. So it does set a keynote at the beginning, or a note that sets the tone or the tune for the meeting. And I see that picked up all the time, and particularly on general evaluation, when I'm evaluating, I would try and bring the poem and the themes that flow from it, or that are referred to in the topics and in the speeches, into that, because it does provide some sort of unifying theme. Though we don't do themed meetings, it does do that, and it's inspiring.
It certainly provides a challenge to everybody to produce language that is as rich as the poet's language. And a poet will describe something in particular words. Hopefully, a speaker will do the same thing.
In poetry, language is used to imply meanings, whereas in prose, language is used to mean what it says. So poetry is much more evocative because it asks you to think about what the poet might be thinking about, rather than telling you in concrete language what he's actually saying.
So here's to the Poet Masters. Ted Melanphy, you would like to finish the episode?
No, Paul, sorry about that. I was just going to bring segment 3 to a very happy conclusion with those wise words of Pat. What I will say is, I think we should carry on this conversation tomorrow. So come back to us tomorrow to hear more about poetry. Well done, Paul. That was lovely.
Very good, Paul. Thank you.
Actually, there's something I want to advise both of you about. There's a poet from County Cavan. Yeah, is it Cavan? It is, yeah, it's Cavan. His name is Stephen Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
He's a fantastic poet. He's a contemporary poet, but he writes about everything contemporary at the moment. He's a fantastic poem. I've read one or two of his poems, but there's one particular one, and it had a big influence on me. It's called "Before You Push the Chair." It's a fantastic poem. So Mara, call Paul back in, and Paul will introduce part 4.
So this is episode
Segment 4.
This is episode 4, right?
Yeah.
Segment 4, right?
And I think we carry on this conversation, Paul. You can open it up, and yourself and Pat should be having a conversation there about Dunleary and Brendan Houghton. Is Brendan a member of that club, Pat?
No, I don't think so.
Dunleary?
No, I think Brendan is. I think Brendan is in Greystones.
Oh, was he? I thought he was in Dunleary, because I can remember he was there.
Okay, so Ted, you should introduce it then if you want it to be Pat and I.
Okay. Yeah, good idea. Mara, tell me when you're right, so.
3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome, Toastmasters, would-be Toastmasters listeners and friends. You will have been listening to a conversation yesterday, and this is what happens in the talk show for talkers, that we strike up a conversation, and it's so engrossing and so absorbing that we have to take another day to follow it up and to finish it off. So Paul and Pat and Ted, if he gets an opportunity, might add to this conversation. So Paul, you and Pat were having a lovely conversation yesterday when we finished up. Will you carry on if you can remember where you were?
Well, welcome listeners. It's absolutely lovely to have your attention again. And I'm today carrying on a conversation that began in the previous episode with Pat Caslin, who is a very distinguished Toastmaster in my eyes, who belongs to a club in Dublin called Dunleary Toastmasters. Pat, you and I were talking yesterday about poetry in a way. And let me ask you, in relation to poetry, when did you first become in any way interested in verse?
I think only about 10 years ago, Paul, when I realized that the book that I used for my Leaving Cert to study poetry by Augustine Martin called Soundings had been reprinted. And I went and I bought it immediately. And it brought me back to my Leaving Cert, which I did in 1978. It's a long time ago. But I was able to go through some of those poems that I liked at the time and I was familiar at the time, but I didn't have the appreciation of them, and I didn't have the ability to express what they meant and the words in them meant. So I've picked up some of those, I've learned them off, particularly some of the Yeats poems, Austin Clarke's poem, The Planter's Daughter, and some other ones, because I find that they're beautiful, they're rhythmic, and they tell a story which you can't tell outside of the poetic medium, and that mean things. They have historical meaning, they have social and cultural meaning, and they go to the core of who we are as a society, particularly Irish poetry, particularly Yeats and other poets. So that's why I picked up poetry.
That's where you picked up poetry. However, what would you say about Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Is that not verse, and did you not hear that as a child, and did that not have an influence on you?
Listen to this instead. This is Alfred Lord Tennyson, which is a poem that I used to say to my children. Let's see if I can remember it. And it goes, sweet and low, wind of the western sea, low, low, breathe and blow, wind of the western sea, over the rolling waters go, come from the dying moon and blow him again to me, while my little one, while my pretty one sleeps. Sleep and rest, father will come to thee soon. Rest, rest on mother's breast, father will come to thee soon. Father will come to his babe in the nest, silver sails all out of the west, under the silver moon. Sleep, my little one, sleep, my pretty one, sleep. The nicest nursery rhyme that I could ever have given to my children, and it got them asleep every time. I think I got the last two lines of it wrong, but that is poetry as distinct and a nursery rhyme, and something that will get your children to sleep every night. Beautiful. Why can nursery rhymes not be poetry?
Well, I don't know who holds the view that nursery rhymes are not poems. I know it's a point of view we could be here debating for a long time. Do you think poetry at the beginning of a meeting runs the risk of sending some of the audience to sleep?
No, not if it's done well, and not if the selection of the poem is something that demonstrates the character of the person and the interest of the person that's doing it. Because the wonderful thing about Toastmasters meetings is that those people who open up their vulnerability and their frailty and their personality and their humanity and their authenticity to the meeting are those people that grow most in Toastmasters, because that is trusted, it's accepted, and it is reflected back in the evaluations and the feedback that they get, and it helps us to grow and be who we are rather than being other people. It drops our masks. And poetry is a way to ease yourself into that process in Toastmasters. So I've never seen anybody wince at the beginning of a meeting and say, nah, I don't want to hear this. It's uplifting.
Lovely. Lovely. Well, you're a fortunate man, I think. You're a very fortunate man. The difficulty I have found with poetry is that some people love it and some people have no time for it. Some people are concrete and they want to crack on with real stuff rather than that kind of namby-pamby poetry stuff, because they've had experiences in school where the way in which they were taught poetry was that poetry was a conundrum which was there to be cracked, and that there was some kind of secret formula which would enable you to understand the symbolic arrangement of all the different parts. And even somebody was foolish enough to tell them that poetry was the highest form of literature. And if poetry is the highest form of literature, then none of us are fit to write it. So we better stick to prose.
Well, let me give you an analogy, Paul, between poetry and evaluations. That we tell each other that an evaluation is your personal view of what you heard. And there's a great article in Toastmaster magazine this month as well about evaluations from two different angles, which I hadn't understood before. One is the consumer evaluation, the speech, how it felt to me, and the producer evaluation. So the production qualities of it, the theatrical qualities, the vocal variety, the gestures, the structure, and all that. So how was it presented, produced, or how was it consumed? But evaluations are personal. They're what you feel they are and how you react to them. Poetry is the same, but they didn't teach us that in school, as you rightly say. They didn't teach us that. Think about this. How do you react to it? What do you feel about it? And and because of that, we were taught that there is a formula for this poetry, and then therefore you must produce this form of answer. And the idea that you can react differently to everybody else was not something that was embraced. There was no there was discussion on it, but the discussion was testing, do you have the right answer? So poetry isn't like that. Poetry should be like an evaluation. How do you feel about it, rather than what is the right answer?
Can I come in there, Paul, please? Because I have to give an add-on to this, actually, this beautiful conversation. Paul, you hit the nail on the head. I think it goes back to our education, and without being, I hope I don't sound like a person who's giving out about the system as it was back in the day, because I did my leaving, Pat, in 1968, and when we were taught poetry, we weren't being taught poetry. Listening to you, both of you, but particularly you, Pat, if you had been the teacher who was telling me about poetry, I would have had a much better love of poetry. But I was being taught it as more or less, you have to learn it, this is the way you see it, but I was never taught to feel it with my heart, which is what poetry does.
The poetry should be part of who we are. Irish poetry particularly is part of our culture, it's part of our heritage, and different poets give us different perspectives on that. Kavanagh, versus Yeats, versus Austin Clarke, versus Seamus Heaney. They give us different senses and experiences of our culture, and that's why I think it's important. They put us in touch with who we are.
If you begin a speech, Pat, I'd be interested in your view on this. If you begin a speech with a quote from a poem, is there not a danger that the audience, or a good chunk of them, will be saying, I wonder what that poem meant? And while they're actually saying to themselves, I don't know what the poet meant by that, the speaker will have carried on saying things which will, of course, have been missed by some of the audience, who will be back with the poem while the speaker is trying to capture the audience's attention. And the speaker who has begun quoting William Wordsworth, for example, will now have some of the audience thinking about Wordsworth and remembering Wordsworth. Oh yeah, that reminds me that Wordsworth was in Tintern Abbey, wasn't he? Or was he up the side of the lakes and all that? So the whole attention of the audience is destroyed by bringing a famous poem into the arena. Now, if you were you're working on speeches, you're doing your best to not just impress people, but move people. What would you say immediately after your quote from the poet? How would you carry on after you said, fair daffodils, we weep to see you haste away so soon? What do you say next as a speaker?
I tend not to start speeches, Paul, with poems. I think what you need to do is be careful that the line that you use has meaning, and that it doesn't, and it's familiar, and it doesn't cause a distraction to the listener, that they've got to go figure what's this about while you're taking them to the next thought. So use familiar lines if you want to open your speech with a poem. But what I would do, though, is that I would often end a speech, or come to the end of a speech, with a line or two of poetry that speak to, that sum up or capture the concepts that I've been using in the speech, so that they would reinforce this, and then they would invite the listener to go away and read the poem and to consider how the poem speaks to the point that I was going to make or reinforces the point that I was going to make. So I'd be careful about where I'd use poetry, but it can be very powerful to quote poetry in a speech, particularly poetry that is that is powerful in what it says, but not so much that it distracts the listener to think, I wonder what that was about, and then they miss the final point in your speech or the main points of your speech. Yeah.
And just like the snow vanishes on the road, we have to bring this week's talk show for talkers to a conclusion. It has been an absolute pleasure, Pat. You were a wonderful guest, and we knew that's what you were going to be. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ted. It's been my pleasure and honor to join this august podcast. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Pat. The pleasure was all ours. Thanks, Paul. And from Paul, from Moira, and from me. Moira is the lady who looks after the technicals. She's the person who makes sure that we go out every week. So it's goodbye from me from this week.
And thank you very much for listening this week.
And thanks to our guest again, Pat Caslin. Now, Pat, what I want you to do is I want you to get on to Dunleary Club and make sure that they all listen in to the talk show for talkers Saturday 4 o'clock.
Yeah, don't worry.
I'll have listen to it again Sunday and again Monday because you're on it for the 3 days.
Does it go out tomorrow? So this episode will go out tomorrow, is it?
No, the first episode, the introduction, the first segment is where Paul and I come up with the word of the day and the thought for the week and stuff. The second segment is you being interviewed on the 5 questions.
Perfect.
And the next Sunday, then you had Paul giving his piece where both you and he collaborated on the poetry. That was a fantastic session. And then, of course, the 4th session goes out on Monday.
Okay,
so
it won't be just Dunleary.
We give you a fix every day.
It won't just be Dunleary, it'll be Dunleary and Digital Communicators and all the other clubs that I'm involved in.
Yes, of course. Well done.
Yeah, so no, I'll get it. I'll get it up on our Facebook page and I'll get it into the area and I'll be telling the division director. No, don't worry.
And that's what we do. We send it around. Actually, our biggest listenership, Pat, is in America. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Now, just to say that I did a big cock up there, guys. You probably won't realize that my intention was to mention, and I forgot to do it, that Sunday, the 21st of March, and this is timed perfectly for that to be out there, is World Poetry Day. And I had every intention of bringing that in.
Well, we can do that next week anyhow, Paul.
No, because
it'll be the Friday, it will be the weekend before. Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. It will be the same weekend.
The key thing was that it would have put this also in a context because it's also in the Toastmaster magazine article.
Yes.
I don't know, Moira, if there's any way of...
do you want to re-record the last question or something?
Well, I think it's Moira who has all the
complications. He has it done, obviously,
It would be awfully easy to record stuff, but Moira would then have to cut it in and he'd have to edit it.
And that was a nice show and it concluded lovely.
You know?
You could put it into
the
description.
What I was going to say is that I'm certainly going to encourage Blarney Toastmasters to bring in a poet piece every meeting. Sorry, Moira.
Come up to Dunleary some night, Ted, and just see how it's done because it's.
I'd love to.
Yeah, it's fantastic. One of the great things is that we've now got members from California.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Can we just hear from Moira? I was
interested
to know whether.
Yeah, I'm going to put it into the notes for this last segment.
Okay, that's fine.
So, that's a good idea, actually, Moira.
Yeah.
International Poets Day, or what?
No, wait a minute. It's World Poetry Day.
World Poetry Day.
Which is a date chosen by UNESCO, which was first. Who began World Poetry Day in 1999.
Yeah, and World Speech Day was during the week, wasn't it? Monday, maybe?
I don't know anything about that.
It was World Speech Day.
What on earth was that about?
World Poetry Day.
Oddly.
March 21st.
A minute.
So
World Poetry Day. We
Pat, when you listen back Saturday, you'll enjoy listening to yourself again.
March
um
21st. Yeah.
guys, I need to love you and
Sorry,
leave.
Ted.
Same here.
5 o'clock.
Sorry,
Stay
Ted.
safe,
Dale,
Pat.
thank you. I will.
Stay
Thank you,
safe,
guys.
stay
Thank you
well.
for having me on. It's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm delighted you enjoyed
yeah,
it.
no, it's I particularly enjoyed the last segment.
Yeah, fantastic.
On the poetry. Thank you for giving me the microphone there, Paul.
We'll say goodbye to YouTube.